At my husband's funeral, my daughter-in-law came up to me and said, "I will take everything from you." I was his mistress. "The marriage with your son was our cover." I didn't respond. My hand was still resting on the white lacquered coffin, my palm warm against its cold, polished curve, as if my touch could coax a heartbeat back into the chest of the man I'd loved for 36 years. Mourners moved like dark fish around us, black jackets, black dresses, black umbrellas, a slow circling of grief, while the organist sent soft waves of hymns into the air. And yet the only thing I could hear clearly was her whisper, venom sweet, flung at me like a curse. "Take your hands off," she added, as if she owned the dead. "He never liked the way you touched him." I withdrew my hand because my body obeyed even when my mind refused. I stood there stiff and small, a mannequin in a pewter suit. My name is Emily Hart, widow as of Thursday, 59, and until that moment I had believed my family was imperfect in ordinary ways. I sympathized with friends whose husbands strayed, a kiss with the neighbor, a late-night business meeting that smelled like bourbon and cologne. I used to feel a tiny lift of pride when I told myself David was not that man. My husband was faithful. My husband was kind. My husband, apparently, was a magician who hid another life behind the curtain of my trust. My daughter-in-law, her name is Tessa, smiled a little. She is 28, all cheekbones and clever eyes, a girl who wore grief like a borrowed dress that didn't need tailoring. She leaned close enough for me to smell her perfume, orange blossom and something metallic, then drifted away toward my son, Mason. He looked shell-shocked, his gaze soft and glassy from a night without sleep or, more likely, a night spent playing online poker with a bottle of whiskey and a laptop glow for company. He is 32 and lost, and I'd been telling myself he would find his way when life quieted down. Life, I see now, had other plans. The service continued. People spoke in kind clichés. The priest said David was a devoted husband, which drew a bruised dark laugh out of Tessa that only I seemed to hear. After the burial, the sky cracked into a watery sunlight and everyone tried to be helpful. There were casseroles and offers to stay the night. I made polite sounds. I folded napkins. I clung to small tasks as though each crease could hold the world together. When the house finally emptied and the last car pulled away, I walked naked-footed into our bedroom and sank onto the edge of the bed we'd shared. I stared at his dresser, mahogany, tidy, untouched, and waited for tears that refused to come. Sometimes shock is not explosive. Sometimes it is a neat, quiet thing that tucks itself into your lungs, so you forget how to breathe. The first person I called was not my son. It was Meredith, my oldest friend, because she has a voice like a porch light, warm, dependable, always finding the front door of sense. I told her what Tessa said. "That girl has always had a mean shine to her," Meredith said. "But, are you sure, David?" "I'm not sure of anything," I said, and finally I wept. It wasn't delicate. It was animal. It was a noise I recognized from nights when I labored to bring Mason into this world, a tearing sound, something born and something lost at the same time. By morning, I had a list. It was what David would have done, organize the wreckage. Item 1, call the lawyer. 2, talk to Mason. 3, get a DNA test, if only to silence the hiss of Tessa's words in my head. The boy, my grandson, Dylan, a sweet 4-year-old who had my husband's stubborn chin and a laugh like wind chimes, was coloring dinosaurs in the den while Tessa scrolled her phone and sighed theatrically. I brought the child a juice pouch and stared at his face for too long, searching for David, searching for myself, searching for a lie that had learned to toddle, to speak, to call me Nana M. When Tessa looked up, she wore a new face, the kind people put on when they decide to become a storm. "We need to discuss the house," she said, without a single condolence left to offer. David promised me I'd be taken care of. He promised me more than a guest room and a pat on the head. "This is my home," I said. "I bought it with David before you were old enough to drive." "Everything in probate becomes flexible," she said, smiling like a cat contemplating a fishbowl. "You'll learn." I didn't throw her out. Not yet. I was learning. I had never been a woman who loved retaliation. I gardened. I baked. I taught second grade for 29 years. I clipped coupons, not wings. But I watched her, how she walked the rooms like an auditor, how she opened cabinets with a proprietary hand, how she took a pair of David's cufflinks and tucked them into her purse, and something I didn't recognize rose inside me, slow and steady as a tide. The lawyer saw me at noon. His office smelled of paper and expensive pen ink. Mr. Caldwell had gray hair and the rectangle glasses you buy when you don't intend to smile. He cleared his throat and told me what David had told him, apparently in secret. Divorce intent. Separation path. An addendum to the will recognizing a significant personal relationship with Ms. Tessa Chen, and setting aside assets in trust for her benefits. Prep work underway. Drafts in progress. He slid the papers across the desk, and the word beneficiary swam like a shark. He never filed, Caldwell said carefully. But he clearly intended to reorganize his life. If he had not died, I believe your marriage would have been dissolved within months. How long have you known? I asked. 8 months, he said, and suddenly I could count my life backward in eights. 8 months since he bought a second phone, for travel, 8 since he started Sunday runs that returned him sweatless, 8 since Tessa became a more frequent presence under the excuse of helping with Dylan. I want a DNA test, I said, my voice flat and foreign. For Dylan. Caldwell nodded. If you fear he is David's, it's better to know. It impacts succession and assets. Impacts. Succession. Assets. Words like machinery. I thought of lullabies and Legos and how Dylan had once fallen asleep with a blueberry stuck to his cheek. I signed whatever I needed to sign to set it in motion. On the drive home, every landmark seemed to be a question I couldn't answer. The dry cleaner where David flirted with the owner about her ancient cash register, had that been practice? The diner where he ate pie with Mason, was that family, or was it a stage? I parked in our driveway and sat with the engine ticking down, listening to the faint echo of the house, the clock David bought in Asheville, the pipes that hummed when the upstairs toilet ran, the silence that arrives after a truth detonates. Inside, Mason was on the couch, controller slack in his hand, eyes red. Mom, he said, and the words shook. Tessa says I shouldn't talk to you until we have a clear legal framework. She said that, I repeated. She says I've been childish about money and you've been manipulative about Dad. His voice pitched upward, then fell apart into something small. I lost him. I can't think. I lost him too, I said, and crossed the room, but he flinched, a reflex I recognized from gamblers who don't want to be touched by luck they can't control. He smelled like stale beer and sour breath. He wore the hoodie he'd slept in. I wanted to gather him the way I had when he was 6 and afraid of thunderstorms. Get some rest, I said instead. We'll talk tomorrow. Tessa didn't come home that evening. She texted me a photo from a steakhouse, 2 cocktails, a plate of expensive meat, a gold watch on a man's wrist that wasn't David's. No caption. I deleted it. Then I went into David's closet for the first time since he died and opened the safe he thought I didn't know about. The combination was our anniversary. He had never changed it, not even in the last 8 months, which told me something sad and tender about habits that outlive love. Inside the safe were papers. Bonds. A stack of passports from his business trips. A velvet box holding the cufflinks Tessa had lifted, apparently not the only set. And tucked into the binder labeled Logistics, Contracts, I found a manila envelope with Tessa's name written in David's slanted hand. My breath stuttered. I opened it with the care you reserve for venomous things. Inside were signed non-disclosure agreements. A lease for an apartment in Chicago under her previous name, Teresa Lowell, paid in cash by a shell LLC David controlled. And photos. Not indecent, David had too much dignity for that, even in betrayal. But there they were, him and Tessa in a restaurant in June, him and Tessa holding hands in front of a theater in November, him and Tessa at a clinic, of all places, with a brochure peeking from his pocket, fertility options for mature couples. My stomach turned. My vision tunneled. I slid to the floor with the envelope in my lap and the air felt thinner than it had in years. I don't know how long I sat there. When I rose, I went to the kitchen, poured water, and stared out the window at the oak David loved. Its branches forked like choices. I thought about the girl at the funeral who told me to take my hands off, as if my touch were offensive to the dead. I thought about Mason, asleep on the couch with the TV murmuring to him like a bad friend. I thought about Dylan, small and vulnerable, coloring his dinosaurs carefully inside the lines. I'm not a cruel woman. I am not quick to anger. But I know a teacher's patience, a gardener's strategy, and a mother's endurance. Revenge is a word people say with relish. Justice is the word you use when you plan to survive. I made tea the way I always do, kettle, steam, a thin ribbon of honey, and took it to the dining table with the envelope and a clean notebook. On the first page I wrote 3 names, Tessa Chen, Teresa Lowell, Mason Hart, Dylan. I drew a box around Dylan's name and shaded it in. Protect the child. Everything else, I decided, would move around that square like planets around a sun. The next morning the DNA kit arrived quicker than I expected. Rush courier, Caldwell's doing. I swabbed Dylan's cheek during an episode of Paw Patrol, singing off-key to distract him. Tessa wasn't home. She was handling an errand, she'd texted, which I later understood to mean auditioning new benefactors. I sealed the envelope and drove it to the lab myself, walking it past the frosted glass and the receptionist who said, in a voice designed to be forgettable, results in 3 to 5 days. On my way back to the car, my phone buzzed. A blocked number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something, the oak's shadow on the sidewalk, the way the wind snapped the flag above the courthouse, made me answer. Mrs. Hart? A man's voice, low, measured. You don't know me. My name is Daniel Pike. I used to be married to a woman named Teresa. Maybe you know her now as Tessa. I stopped on the courthouse steps. The air felt newly thin again. I need to warn you, he said. And I need to ask something about the day your husband died. What? I whispered, my pulse hammering. Do you need to ask? He exhaled, the sound of a man who had carried a heavy thing for a long time. Did your husband always take the same route to the airport? Because when I read the report about the crash, the location looked familiar. The line went quiet, a taut wire between past and present. For the first time since the funeral, I felt the beat of something fierce and bright under my grief, not relief, not yet, but a purpose uncoiling. Mr. Pike, I said, straightening, come to my house. Bring everything you have. And as I hung up, I looked at the envelope on my passenger seat with Tessa's old name scrawled across it, and I understood. If this was the game, I would learn the rules, and I would win, not because I craved vengeance, but because Dylan needed a grandmother who could turn a storm back on itself. I turned the key in the ignition, a plan already stitching itself together in quiet, deliberate threads. Daniel Pike arrives with the wary posture of a man who's been burned by telling the truth. He stands on my porch in a faded navy jacket, a knuckle scar peeking from his cuff like an old regret. I pour coffee. He doesn't take cream. He lays a thin folder on my kitchen table and keeps his palm on it, as if it might fly away. I was married to Teresa Lowell, he says, eyes flicking toward the hall where Dylan's cartoons hum. We met in Chicago. She was the sort of woman who knows how a room breathes. She could slow it down just by walking in. How do you know my husband? I ask. I don't, he says. But I know how Teresa chooses men. Older, successful, a touch lonely. Men who like to fix things and don't realize they're broken. He slides the folder across the table. I open it. Photocopies of a marriage license. A restraining order he filed, then withdrew. A police report about a neighbor who saw Teresa throw a vase that shattered a window and bloodied his arm. And then the affidavit, 2 pages, that says he believed Teresa had poisoned his dog, a basset hound named Mabel, after he threatened to leave. No charges. Insufficient evidence, the stamp says, as if justice were a cupboard that had simply run out of flour. How did it end? I ask. Quite dramatically, he says. A gas leak. Not at our apartment. At the bakery below. Nobody died. But the fire marshal said the valve downstairs worked. Like someone had known what they were doing. That was the night I ran. I caught her searching for my mother's bank information on a yellow sticky note. I packed a bag, called a friend with a spare room, and I didn't look back. And now you read my husband's obituary, I say, piecing the path. You recognized her new name in the condolences. He nods. Teresa becomes Tessa when she wants to be softened. Lowell becomes Chen when she wants to be new. We sit with the weight of that for a moment. The house politely ticks. The oak's shadow shifts across the floor like a slow tide. Daniel reaches into his jacket and takes out a map of the city with 2 routes to the airport traced in pen, David's usual and David's final. Most people take the expressway, he says, tapping the line David always took. Quick, predictable, cameras everywhere. Your husband's crash happened here. He taps a different curve, a side road with a narrow bridge and a blind turn where the river gnaws at its banks. A place with broken streetlights and no traffic monitors since the county cut funding. Maybe there was construction on the expressway, I say, even as my throat shuts on the maybes. Maybe, he allows. Or maybe someone who knew your husband's habits suggested the scenic route. Teresa liked scenic routes. Not because the views were better, but because fewer people watched. The words hang there, dangerous, impossible to unhear. I think of David's careful kindness, his habit of telling me when he'd be late, his refusal to leave my messages unanswered. The night he died, he texted a Hart at 7:12 p.m. and then nothing again. He would not choose a dark road when a bright one would do. Do you have proof? I ask. No, he says. Only patterns. And men who learned too late that her affection was a net. Dylan shouts for help because his cartoon dog can't find the bone. I excuse myself, fix it, kiss the top of his head, then return to the kitchen where the air is older. I make a decision while standing in the doorway between 2 worlds, one where I bake muffins for preschool drop-offs, and one where I trace the outline of a woman who wears names the way other people wear coats. Will you talk to a detective? I ask. Gladly, he says. By afternoon, I've hired one. Her name is Sloane Rivera, mid-40s, hair like a blade, a smile like good bourbon, warm and searing at once. We meet in her office over a chartreuse legal pad. She listens without interrupting, and when I finish, she says, I will find her seams. What if there aren't any? I ask. There always are, Sloane says. Con artists are storytellers. They forget that paper remembers better than people. I hand her copies from the safe, NDAs, the Chicago lease, the shell company's name. I give her Daniel's folder. I give her the map. She takes it all with professional hunger. Also, I say, I want to know how the affair started. I need to know the shape of what I survived. Where did they meet, she asks. At my son's engagement party, I say, each syllable a small betrayal against my own gullibility. She catered cupcakes. David said she reminded him of a young Audrey Hepburn with better eyebrows. I'd laughed because it sounded harmless. I'd danced to Sinatra. I'd believed joy was something you could keep if you held it nicely. Sloane writes quickly. I'll start with the cupcakes, she says. Vendors keep records. So do hotel ballrooms, reception halls, hospitals, airlines. If there was a clinic visit, there's a billing trail, even if the names aren't theirs. Money? I ask. You tell me your budget, she says. I think of the safe, the bonds, the accounts that bear my name alone, not because David planned for betrayal, but because he believed in division of labor. He ran the companies, I ran the nest. I am not reckless. I open a new account that afternoon, fund it quietly, and gives Sloane a retainer that makes her eyebrows rise. I want results, I say. You'll have them, she says. That evening, Tessa returns with a bouquet of lilies and a martyr's composure. Mason trails her, hollow-eyed, 10 steps behind. She sets the flowers in my sink, not in a vase. Lawyers, she says lightly, as if we weren't discussing my life but a film we watched together. Mr. Caldwell informed me that David was organizing his estate. Were you organizing it with him? I ask. She smiles. We organized many things, Emily. Your husband liked a plan. Mason flinches. Tess, he warns. She ignores him. Anyway, she continues, I'll be staying in the master bedroom. We should all be comfortable while probate proceeds. You can take the guest room. Out of the question, I say, a calmness unfurling in my bones that surprises even me. And Mason, I turn to my son, whose shoulders are at a slope that makes me ache. Tomorrow we're meeting a counselor. You're sleeping at the sober house Caldwell recommended. You'll be home when you can be trusted with cash and keys. He bristles. You can't talk to me like I'm 12. I can, I say gently, because you're my child and you're drowning. Tessa laughs, nasty and bell-like. Look at the schoolteacher. She thinks rules fix everything. I walk past her, take the lilies from the sink, and place them in the trash. The scent had opened David's sinuses, now it opens something else. In my home, I say, trash goes in the bin, not the water line. Her face flickers. Small disrespect unsettles her more than big stands, something to remember. She leans closer. You don't get to keep this house because you baked pies in it. I get to keep it because my name is on the deed, I say. Yours is on a series of men. Mason makes a choking sound. Tessa's eyes flash. She wants a scene. I deny her the oxygen. Dinner at 6, I say. You're both welcome if you can use cutlery like adults. I roast chicken. I mash potatoes. Stability, plated. Mason eats like a man surfacing. Tessa drinks wine and glares. When Dylan asks for seconds, I give them to him and blur my eyes so he is every child I ever fed after a hard day. When the boy goes to bed, I tuck him in and choose a book with a brave rabbit. I kiss his forehead and tuck the hurt tighter around my ribcage so it won't leak on him. At 10 o'clock, Sloane calls. A beginning, she says. Your husband's first purchase from Butter and Bloom, the cupcake boutique, was 6 dozen for the engagement party. 2 weeks later, a private order, 1 dozen lemon curd for an unnamed pickup, cash. The signature on the receipt matches your husband's. After that, monthly orders, always cash, always after hours, until 6 months ago, when the volume increases. Then there's a lease. Your shell company paid a deposit for a storefront next door to Butter and Bloom's kitchen. A door between them was cut in May. And this, papers rustle. A clinic invoice for a consultation about assisted conception options. Patient name redacted, but the file number appears in your husband's HSA disbursements. The last appointment was 3 weeks before his death. How long, I ask, do you think it lasted? From paper? Sloane says. A year and change. From the look of it? Longer. I sit on the edge of my bed and let the facts tree themselves inside me, the branching, the dates, the blossoms I mistook for kindness. Thank you, I say. Find me more. One more thing, she adds. Tessa's driver's license shows 2 prior name changes and 3 addresses in 5 years. One of those addresses is linked to a man named Joel Beck, filed missing by his sister 9 years ago. Another belongs to a widower who drowned, accident labeled boating mishap. Might be nothing. Might not. My mouth goes dry. Can we prove she was with them? That she benefited? If she profited, there's paper, Sloane says. I'll turn rocks. After I hang up, I step into the hall. Tessa is there in the dark, a pale slice of face, phone glowing in her hand. Eavesdropping? I ask. Just texting a friend, she purrs. Sleeping alone makes me restless. Then maybe go home, I say. She leans an inch closer. You're making this hard, Emily. Don't. Take the guest room. Be dignified. Let money make you comfortable. That's what it's for. Money, I say, is for doctors and tutors and fixing cracked foundations. It's for lawyers, too, when you've run out of patience. For a second, she sees me. Not the soft teacher. Not the tired widow. The woman who has opened a different door. Her mouth thins. You don't want a war with me, she whispers. I don't, I agree. A war would imply we are equals. She sucks in a breath, stocked with insult. She slips away. I go back to my room and write until midnight, names, dates, retainer amounts, the steps a judge will require to curtail a mother's rights if she is proved dangerous and absent. I title the page, Custody for Dylan. Rehabilitation for Mason. Containment for Tessa. I copy it twice. I tuck one into my bra like a relic. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzes again. Caldwell, of all people, texting an apology for his daytime bluntness and a PDF, probate strategies in cases of marital misconduct. I save it. I underline phrases in my mind: equitable relief, marital waste, undue influence. Words like clean tools. At 3 a.m., the house whispers a sound, front door, soft. I step into the hallway and watch from the shadow of the banister. Tessa slips out with a small suitcase, heels in her hand, an Uber idling at the curb. She doesn't look back. I do. At the child's room. At my son on the couch, a controller still on his chest like a broken compass. At the empty master closet where a man I loved folded his shirts with laughable neatness. The night smells like lilies from the bin. In the morning, before the sun learns the street, Sloane texts 3 words, found a Joel. And then a 4th, alive. I sit down hard on the stairs, heart jarring, a new branch snapping into view. If he's alive, he can talk. If he can talk, paper can speak out loud. By 7, coffee in hand, I dial the DNA lab to check the status, because answers have become a hunger. By 8, I've moved the family documents and the bonds to a safety deposit box at a different bank under a new trust Sloane's friend drew up overnight. By 9, I've booked Mason at a residential program with a therapist who doesn't flinch at the word compulsion. By 10, the doorbell rings. It's a child services investigator, clipboard ready, smile practiced. Someone has filed a complaint alleging neglect against me. Anonymous tip, she says. We just need to take a look. I glance at the lilies peeking from the kitchen trash. I think of Tessa's suitcase in the dark. I smile, larger than I feel. Of course, I say, stepping aside. Come in. We keep our monsters where we can see them. As she crosses the threshold, I feel the bone-deep click of a line being drawn and my foot gripping the right side of it. Whatever this is, however deep it goes, I am no longer the woman pressed to a coffin, waiting for someone to tell her what is true. I am making truth. And I am setting the stage for a fall so elegant that even Tessa will hear the applause as she exits. Outside, the oak shivers. Somewhere, a map folds. And in my pocket, my phone lights up with a message from Sloane, meet Joel. Noon. He says he married a black widow once. The child services investigator walked through my house as if she were cataloging sins. She peeked inside cupboards, lifted her eyebrows at the wine rack, scribbled notes when she saw Mason snoring on the couch. Dylan clung to my leg, his small fingers sticky with jam. I bent down, kissed his hair, and whispered, "Go play with your blocks, sweetheart." He obeyed, eyes darting toward the stranger with a clipboard. Anonymous complaint, she repeated, as though the word anonymous were enough to justify barging into my grief. Neglect, possibly substance abuse. We'll need to do a full evaluation. I smiled the way I'd learned to smile at irate parents when I was a teacher. Polite, calm, impenetrable. You're welcome to look anywhere, I said. I've raised children longer than you've been drawing breath. When she left, promising to follow up, I closed the door and leaned against it. Tessa's handiwork. She thought she could plant weeds and watch them choke me. She hadn't realized that I kept pruning shears sharp. At noon I met Joel Beck. He was older than his photographs, shoulders rounded, hair thin, but his eyes carried the tremor of a man who had once lived inside a trap. We met at a cafe off Wabash, where the windows looked out on a rush of people who didn't care about our quiet war. I married her when she was still Teresa Lowell, he said, his voice gravelly from cigarettes. She told me she was 22, an orphan. She was 30 and twice divorced. I found out too late. He pushed a stack of papers across the table. Bank withdrawals. Insurance policies she made me sign. A boating trip where she insisted I drink champagne, even though I couldn't swim. I made it back to shore because the engine stalled before we got far. He gave a bitter smile. Luck is the only reason I'm alive. And after you left her? I asked. She followed me for months. Anonymous calls, threats about my sister, even a letter saying she'd finish the job if I ever spoke her name. His hands trembled as he lifted his coffee. You need to be careful. She knows how to charm a courtroom. She'll cry, she'll talk about her poor son, she'll paint herself a saint. But she's poison. I thought of Dylan's smile, the way he pronounced spaghetti as paschetti. My jaw hardened. Then it's time someone exposed her. That evening, Sloane arrived at my house with a manila envelope fat with printouts. She laid them on the table like a dealer with a royal flush. 3 marriages, she said. 1 annulled within weeks. 1 husband missing in Michigan. 1, Joel, escaped. Each time she changed names, moved states, left nothing but whispers. She slid me a photo, Tessa in a courtroom, 7 years ago, under the name Teresa Lowell, suing for spousal support. Her eyes were the same, though, bright, sly, unbroken by conscience. She's known in some circles as the Black Widow, Sloane said. Urban legend status. The kind of woman men tell cautionary tales about in bars. Most don't survive long enough to confirm. I stared at the photo until my eyes blurred. My daughter-in-law, the mother of my grandson, had slithered through lives like a snake shedding skins. And she thought she could shed me too. Can we prove it in court? I asked. Not yet. But if we gather testimony, Joel's, Daniel's, maybe relatives of the missing husband, we'll build a wall too high for her to climb. I nodded. Do it. Tessa returned home late, perfume heavy, lips swollen from some stranger's kiss. She saw the files spread across my table and smirked. Homework, Emily? You're too old for that. I met her gaze without flinching. You should worry less about my homework and more about your past. For the first time, I saw her mask crack. Just a hairline fracture, but enough. She slammed her purse down. You think you can dig up stories and scare me? I have your son. I have your grandson. I have your husband's money. You have nothing, I said quietly, my voice sharp as glass. Not when the truth arrives. She stepped closer, so close I could see the smear of mascara at her lashes. If you try to take Dylan from me, I will bury you. I smiled, small and deliberate. You already tried. But I own the shovel. Her eyes widened, fury flickering like a match about to burn down the house. She grabbed her purse, stormed upstairs, and slammed the master bedroom door. The chandelier rattled. I sat back down at the table, gathered Sloane's files, and whispered a promise to myself, this ends with Dylan safe. This ends with Tessa gone. This ends with me winning. And somewhere above me, behind a locked door, the Black Widow began to weave her next snare. The child services follow-up came at 9 the next morning, 2 people this time, a woman with a clipboard and a man who tried to look friendly. I'd prepared. The kitchen gleamed, the laundry was folded, Dylan's breakfast plate boasted sliced strawberries arranged like a smile. I had a binder labeled care and routine with pediatrician checkups, immunization records, preschool attendance, and a week's worth of menus. Teachers love rubrics, judges do too. Anonymous complainant alleged neglect and alcohol abuse, the man said gently. You're welcome to breathalyze me, I replied, offering black coffee and the quiet confidence of someone who alphabetizes her spices. Also, please note the nanny cam in the den. It records date and time. They toured. They nodded. They watched a clip I'd cued, last Tuesday, for 11 p.m. Tessa dumping Dylan at the front door and leaving without knocking, the boy standing on the step clutching a plastic dinosaur while an Uber tail light disappeared. The woman's pen hesitated. The man cleared his throat. When they left, they promised to close the file pending final review. I shut the door, leaned my forehead against the wood, and exhaled. Paper cuts win battles. Not slaps. At 10, another knock, a courier with an envelope that might as well have been a live wire. DNA results. I took it to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed where David used to tie his shoes. Hands steady, I opened it. Probability of paternity between Dylan Chen and David Hart, 99. 98%. No breath left. Just a hard, bright quiet. I'd known, some part of me had known from the way his stern little chin echoed David's, but seeing letters line up into reality is different from feeling them burn your skin. I pressed my palm to the paper until the heat bled out of my hand. I walked to the den. Dylan was building a bridge from blocks, tongue peeking from his mouth in concentration. He looked up and beamed, as if the world had always been this simple, a nana, a bridge, a dinosaur who needed crossing. Love is a choice, I thought, and sometimes it's the easiest one. I called Caldwell. He picked up on the first ring. It's David's, I said. And Tessa's. His pause was brief. Understood. That affects intestate distribution calculations and may strengthen her standing. On the other hand, it also strengthens yours if you seek guardianship and can show maternal instability and the father's intent to provide for the child through you. Draft what we need, I said. Emergency guardianship. Asset protection. I'm done reacting. Next, I phoned Mason. He didn't answer. I found him 20 minutes later in the garage, balanced on a folding chair, rummaging through old moving boxes for chips he could pawn. He looked like a boy caught with a hand in the cookie jar, shame smeared across his face. We have the results, I said softly. Dylan is your father's son. Mason's eyes slid closed. He swayed. God, he whispered, then laughed once, brittle, wrong. Of course. I put a hand on his arm. He flinched, then stayed. I booked you into Clearwater Recovery. 30 days. You check in this afternoon. I'll pack a bag. He tried to argue. He tried to grin. He tried to make a joke about detox smoothies. I stood still until the performance fell away. You are not your father's mistake, I said. But you will become your own if you don't get help. He swallowed, looked at the concrete floor. Will Dylan hate me? He will love the man who shows up for him, I said. Go become that man. Sloan texted at noon, parking lot, 10 minutes. Bring your calmest face. I grabbed my notebook and the envelope of results and met her behind the hardware store. She was already there with a woman in a blazer who introduced herself as Tanya Wu, forensic accountant. She had kind eyes and the energy of someone who knows where every dollar has ever slept. Your husband's companies, construction and logistics, Tanya said, flipping open a tablet. Thin slivers of cash have been siphoned from freight contracts into a vendor called Asteria Supply. On paper, it sells industrial fasteners. In reality, it is a funnel, shell on shell, into a personal account created 9 months ago. Holder of record, Teresa Lowell. I felt the world tilt. He was paying her. Grooming her for independence, Tanya said. Or covering tracks. But here's the thing, because the account is tied to a false identity and funded by company streams, we can frame this as marital waste and embezzlement from the corporate entity. You, as surviving spouse and board member by succession clause, she nodded at Sloane, who had already unearthed the clause, can petition to freeze that outlet and claw back transfers. Do it, I said. Already filed an emergency petition with a friendly judge, Sloane added, eyes glinting. Hearing at 4. And the crash? I asked. Any thread? Sloane's smile went thin. Working it. We pulled traffic cams near the side road. Nothing clear yet. But we found a tow company ticket timestamped 15 minutes before the crash, call placed from a burner registered to a Florence Arnett. Guess who used that alias in Michigan in 2017? I didn't have to guess. The name tasted like copper. Can we tie the call to Tessa? We'll need phone dumps and a subpoena, Sloane said. It's coming. I looked at the results envelope in my hand, proof of blood. Then at the women in front of me, proof of backbone. Let's make today the day we stop whispering. Back home, I changed the locks. I texted Tessa the new code for the front door with a simple message, for safety. Dylan is napping. Dinner at 6. She responded with a rose emoji. I put my phone face down on the counter and rolled out pie dough because some wars are won on the ground of normalcy. At 3, the doorbell rang. Not Tessa, 2 men in suits. Company board members. They offered condolences, then cleared their throats in unison like a rehearsed choir. We'd like to discuss leadership transition, one said. The contracts pipeline is nervous. The unions want reassurance. And, to be frank, Ms. Chen has been in touch about her share of the helm. Ms. Chen's role is maternal, not managerial, I said. And she will not be stepping onto the helm of anything I'm aboard. We need steady hands, the other said gently. Are you prepared to be visible? I thought of standing at David's funerals, in the boardroom, the showroom, the warehouse floor, speaking about continuity while my life shed its skin. The idea made me want to lie down and sleep for a year. But rest is for later. Yes, I said. Prepare a statement, I'll assume interim chair. We'll audit vendor flows. We'll announce a zero-tolerance policy for conflicts of interest and the immediate review of all third-party relationships established in the last 12 months. They looked relieved, as if a mother had stepped into a cafeteria food fight. We'll draft, they promised. And, Mrs. Hart? You have more spine than most men we've hired. I taught 2nd grade, I said. Unionize a room of 7-year-olds and tell me logistics is hard. They laughed, then left. The door clicked. The kitchen fell quiet except for the tick of the oven. It smelled like cinnamon and resolve. At 3:45, I kissed Dylan's hair, handed him to Meredith for a play date, left a detailed sitter sheet, allergies, none. Favorite book, Dragons Love Tacos. If he asks for paschetti, he means spaghetti, and drove to the courthouse with Sloane. The emergency hearing on the Asteria supply funnel lasted 19 minutes. Tanya's spreadsheet spoke a dialect judge's love, indisputable. The freeze order hit like a door slamming. We walked out into late daylight that felt, for once, like daylight instead of interrogation. Tessa was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against a black SUV like a billboard for bad decisions. Large sunglasses. Red mouth. A purse that could pay a semester's tuition. You're cute when you pretend you know what you're doing, she said, slipping the shades down her nose. Freezing accounts? You think that stops me? I think it slows you, I said. Which is enough. She pushed off the car and stepped close. Listen to me, Emily. You're making this ugly. You want your grandson? Fine. We'll share. You want the house? Fine. You can keep your little museum. But I'll take the companies. And if you keep digging, I will put your son in jail. The threat landed with surgical precision. She smiled when she saw it register. Gambling debts, she purred. Fraud, if I decide a couple of his online ventures were misrepresented. I can make a phone call and your boy will be booked before bedtime. I remembered Mason as a child, clutching a nightlight shaped like a moon. I pictured him in County Orange. I let the image burn, then set it down. You won't, I said. Because you need Mason pliable. And because if you touch him, I release a file to the press titled The Black Widow of Wabash containing 3 affidavits, 2 police reports, a missing persons connection, and a financial map that spells your maiden names in numbers. I will staple it to your reputation. And I will not miss. She blinked. It was small, but it was real. She reached for a different weapon. You're alone, she said softly. Your husband chose me over you. Your son would sell you for a chip stack. And that child calling you Nana? He belongs to my womb and your husband's blood. Then consider me the blood's attorney, I said. And the womb's witness. She laughed, but it wasn't the pretty sound she made for juries. Enjoy your little wins, she said, sliding into the SUV. The boardroom is bigger than your kitchen. As luck would have it, I murmured to the closing window, I'm bigger in rooms. I dropped Sloane at her office and drove to Clearwater with Mason's duffel in the trunk. He waited on the steps, hands in pockets, eyes vacant in the sauce of a hangover. When he saw me, he stood like a man going to a cliff's edge to look at what falling costs. I don't want to, he said. I know, I replied. Go anyway. He hugged me then, awkward, stuttering, the way boys do when they're trying not to cry. Make sure Dylan eats, he said into my hair. Tell him. I'm sorry I'm sick. You're not bad, I said. You're broken open. Let the doctors stitch what I can't. He nodded, wiped his face with his sleeve, and walked inside. On the way home, I rehearsed the board statement out loud at red lights, polishing verbs into steel. At the house, I scooped Dylan up and made paschetti, and we ate at the table where David had once tried to teach him to twirl, noodles flinging onto the wall in joyous defiance. I left the smear there. A small rebellion. A flag. At bedtime, I read Dragons Love Tacos and watched Dylan fight sleep like a prizefighter. When he finally surrendered, lashes resting on his cheeks like commas, I kissed his forehead and stood in the doorway listening to the even hush of his breathing. My phone buzzed. Sloane, pulling phone records. And, you'll want to see this. Sending clip. A link. A dash of static. Then a grainy, streetlight-stained video, a woman at the edge of the narrow bridge where David died, walking back to a car with the hood up, tossing something over the rail into the dark. The timestamp, 18 minutes before the crash. The shape, small, black, like a phone or a device. The woman's gait was unmistakable to me, even in pixels. I'd watched her cross my kitchen with that same catcom stroll. Sloane, we can't positively ID yet. I'll get enhancements. But, Emily. I stared until the clip became a pulse. I closed my eyes and saw the white lacquered coffin, and my hand, and Tessa's whisper. I opened them and saw a different thing, a trapdoor, the outline finally clear. I went to the desk and opened my notebook to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, Act 2, Stage Goes Public. Under it, 3 bullet points. Interim Chair Statement. Guardianship Petition, Emergency. Press Packet, Sealed, Timed Release. Then, lower, alone on a line I circled twice, invite her to win. Because some people can't resist a stage. And some traps only spring when you let your enemy step into the spotlight and claim it as hers. I turned off the lamp. The house settled. The oak outside drew a shape on the wall that looked, if I squinted, like a crown. I did not feel victorious. I felt awake. In the morning, would iron a navy dress and put on David's watch and walk into a boardroom full of men who thought widowhood makes you soft. I would speak steadily until the room remembered who builds empires, women who know their way around a ledger and a lullaby. And after the applause, would take the microphone and invite Tessa to stand beside me, publicly, for a charitable photo with Dylan, the heir she thought was her leverage. I smiled into the dark. Invite her to win. Let her step front and center. And then show the lights what they've been shining on. The navy dress smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet I'd tucked into David's drawer years ago. I smoothed the hem, fastened the gold watch he'd given me on our 20th anniversary, and pinned my hair with the calm precision of a woman preparing not for battle but for performance. Because that's what this was, theater. The boardroom was a stage, and my audience was a panel of men with ink-stained fingers and nervous eyes. Sloane met me at the curb. "You look like a widow who eats corporations for breakfast," she said. "That's the idea." Inside, the logistics board sat in a semicircle of leather chairs, each man clutching his own copy of Tanya's audit report. They looked at me as though I might break or burst into tears. Instead, I stood at the head of the table and read the statement I'd drafted on the back of Dylan's crayon drawings the night before. David Hart built this company on steel and integrity. His loss is personal, but our foundation is strong. I accept the role of interim chair with full intention of preserving contracts, stabilizing operations, and protecting our employees' livelihoods. Effective immediately, all vendor accounts established within the last 12 months will be subject to review. Conflict of interest policies will be enforced without exception. Silence, then cautious nods. One man cleared his throat. "And Ms. Chen?" I let the pause linger, long enough that even the clock seemed to hold its tick. "MS. Chen is a member of my family," I said smoothly. "Her role is maternal, not managerial. I will support her in that role. But the company remains under my stewardship until the board sees fit to elect otherwise." Murmurs, scribbles of pens, the sound of relief exhaled into the room. Someone said, "Strong. Very strong." That was when the door opened and perfume slithered in. Tessa. In crimson silk, hair cascading, lips painted the color of war. She smiled, a starlet late to her cue. "Gentlemen," she purred. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "You are," I said. She ignored me, sweeping toward the head of the table as if gravity bent for her heels. "David wanted me here," she announced. "He trusted me. I was his confidant." Gasps, uncomfortable coughs. One board member muttered, "Not the time." But Tessa thrived on discomfort. She perched on the edge of the table, crossing her legs, red dress slicing like a wound through the oak and leather. "I know things about David's plans," she continued. "He wanted me to help modernize the company, take it global. I have contacts in Singapore." "Sit down," I interrupted, my voice sharp as chalk on a board. Her head whipped toward me, eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" "You're excused," I said. "This is a meeting of the board of Hart Logistics. You are neither a board member nor an executive officer. Your role is not recognized here." The silence that followed was surgical. Every man in that room shifted his gaze to me, not her. They were watching to see if I flinched. I didn't. Finally, the chairman of finance said, "Mrs. Hart, perhaps we should adjourn." "Yes," I said, "after we reaffirm the interim chair's authority and release a press statement at noon." Tessa's smile wavered. For the first time, she wasn't the brightest object in the room. Outside, cameras waited. The board had tipped off the press, wanting to show stability. I stepped up to the microphones with the city seal glinting behind me. Tessa tried to stand at my side, but I extended a hand toward Dylan's photo in my purse and said, "Family privacy is paramount. Today's message is business." The cameras clicked like locusts. I delivered my lines with a steady voice: "Contracts secure, employees safe, future bright." And then, as rehearsed, I pivoted. "We will also honor David's legacy by supporting families in crisis. To that end, I am proud to announce the Hart Foundation for Child Wellness." I smiled at the sea of lenses. My grandson, Dylan, will cut the ribbon at our launch gala next month. His mother will, of course, be present. It was bait disguised as grace. Tessa froze for half a heartbeat, then plastered on her movie star grin. Of course, she echoed. Let her have the spotlight, I thought. Let her think she owns it. That night, the house smelled of tomato sauce and garlic bread. Dylan twirled noodles with a fork bigger than his hand. Nana, look, he shouted, sauce streaking his cheek. I clapped, because applause matters, even in small kitchens. Tessa strolled in late, hair perfect, eyes glittering with fury held behind glass. She poured herself wine, leaning against the counter. Cute performance today, she said. Thank you, I replied. You're not as stupid as you look. I smiled. Neither are you. Her hand tightened on the glass. If you think you can parade me around at some charity gala like your pet project, you're mistaken. You'll come, I said softly, because you can't resist a stage. And when you step onto it, the lights will show exactly what you are. For a moment, we stared at each other over the clink of Dylan's fork. Then she laughed, low and dangerous. Careful, Emily. The last woman who crossed me moved states to forget her own name. Funny, I said, lifting my wine. I hear the same story about men. Her smile vanished. She set down the glass with a thud and left the kitchen. Dylan looked up, confused. Is Mommy mad? No, I said, wiping sauce from his cheek. She's just practicing for the play. Later, when the house quieted, I spread Sloane's latest reports across my bed. Phone records linked the burner near the crash site to a SIM card purchased under one of Tessa's old names. Not conclusive, but damning. The detective's notes scribbled in the margins, bridge sabotage plausible. Continue digging. I stared at the words until they blurred. My husband hadn't just betrayed me, he might have died because the woman he betrayed me with grew tired of his usefulness. The grief I'd buried surged fresh. But beneath it lay something else, harder, sharper. Resolve. I closed the folder, slid it into the safe, and whispered into the dark, soon. Because now I wasn't just fighting for Dylan's future. I was fighting for David's ghost. The gala invitation arrived 2 weeks later, printed on ivory cardstock with gilt lettering, the Hart Foundation for Child Wellness, launch benefit. My name stood alone at the top as chair. Below, in smaller print, with special appearance by Dylan Hart and his mother, Tessa Chin. It was deliberate, her name second, mine first. When I showed it to Sloane, she smirked. You just handed her the bait on a silver platter. She'll spend every spare dollar making sure she looks like royalty that night. That's the plan, I said. And I was right. For the next days, Tessa hardly came home before midnight. Bags from boutiques littered her bedroom. A seamstress visited twice. Dylan complained she skipped bedtime stories, so I read 2 each night, holding him until his breathing softened. He asked if he could call me Mom once. I kissed his forehead and told him, I'm Nana, forever. But the ache of that question burned all the same. Meanwhile, Mason called from Clearwater. His voice was clearer, steadier. Mom, I've been sober 2 weeks, he said, pride mingling with disbelief. I'm proud of you, I told him. I keep dreaming of Dad, he admitted. But in the dream, he's trying to tell me something, and I can't hear. You'll hear when you're ready, I said. Focus on healing. He laughed quietly. You sound like one of the counselors. Good, I replied. Maybe it'll stick twice as hard. The night of the gala arrived. The hotel ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers, the kind David always said looked like upside-down icebergs. Guests in tuxedos and gowns sipped champagne, journalists hovered at the edges, cameras clicked. Tanya and Sloane flanked me like guardian angels in heels. Then came Tessa. She swept in wearing a gown of midnight blue sequins, diamonds dripping from her ears, lips scarlet. She carried Dylan on her hip as if he were a prop. The cameras loved her. She basked in it, tilting her chin so the flashbulbs crowned her in light. I stepped forward, kissed Dylan's cheek, and took his hand. The photographers swarmed. And in that moment, with Dylan between us, the stage was set. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, "thank you for honoring my husband's legacy tonight. We are here to protect children, to keep them safe from neglect and harm. Some of you know I taught for nearly 3 decades. Children remember everything. They deserve honesty. They deserve guardians who put them first." Tessa smiled tightly beside me, lips straining. "And tonight," I continued, "we also honor transparency. Which is why I've asked our foundation's partners to present a report about the dangers of deception, and the importance of vetting those who care for children." At my signal, the projector flared to life. On the screen appeared a grainy video, Tessa at the bridge, tossing the black object into the river. The timestamp glowed. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. "What is this?" she hissed at me, her face pale beneath the rouge. "A clip," I said softly enough for only her to hear, "from 18 minutes before David's crash." Reporters surged forward. The board members whispered furiously. Dylan, sensing tension, clutched my hand. "Turn it off." Tessa shrieked, lunging toward the projector. Security stepped between us. Cameras flashed like lightning. And there it was, the moment she couldn't resist. The spotlight burned, and instead of playing victim, she bared her teeth. Her mask slipped in front of every lens in the city. I bent toward the microphone, my voice calm, measured, in perfect contrast to her fury. "Our foundation exists to protect the innocent. Because deception has consequences. And because truth always finds its way to the light." Tessa's eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit. For once, she didn't find one. And as the crowd pressed closer, I realized, the trapdoor had opened. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing like a hornet in a jar. It hadn't stopped since midnight. The gala's footage had spread across every news outlet, every gossip blog, every financial column. The video of Tessa shrieking at security, the projector image frozen on her shadowed figure by the bridge, it was on the morning shows, spliced between commercials for cereal and cars. "Black Widow or Widow-in-Law?" One headline screamed. "Gala explosion, Hart family secrets exposed," read another. My lawyer's voice was ragged when he finally got through. "Emily, you've detonated a bomb." "Good," I said. Tessa didn't come home that night. She didn't come home the next morning either. Instead, she released a statement through her attorney calling the video misinterpreted, claiming she had merely disposed of a broken phone, and that grief had made her volatile. She accused me of elder abuse, manipulation, and a campaign of slander. But the damage was done. Every channel ran split screens. On the left, the gala footage of me calm, dignified, composed. On the right, Tessa in midnight sequins, screaming and clawing for the projector. The contrast was devastating. By noon, the board called an emergency meeting, without her. They voted unanimously to confirm me as chair for the remainder of the fiscal year. One man, a gruff logistics chief with decades of contracts behind him, clapped my shoulder. "You've got more steel than David ever did," he said quietly. I nodded, but inside, I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. Steel wasn't what I wanted. Love was. But love was ashes now. Steel would have to do. That afternoon, Sloane came to the house with papers. Emergency guardianship hearing is set for next week. But with the press storm, I doubt Tessa will even show. Judges hate drama. You've positioned yourself as the stable caregiver. And Mason? I asked. He's progressing, she said. Clearwater reports he's attending every session, no skipped groups. He wants to testify, Emily. He wants to stand up in court and say he's willing to give custody to you. Tears pricked, hot and unwelcome. My son, finally ready to choose responsibility over escape. If he's strong enough, I whispered. He's stronger than he knows, Sloane said. That night, I tucked Dylan into bed. He clutched his dinosaur, eyes heavy. "Nana," he murmured. "Yes, sweetheart." "Are the cameras gone?" I stroked his hair. "Yes. Just you and me now." He sighed, the sound of a child who trusted the world again. Within minutes, he slept. I stood in the doorway and thought of Tessa, alone, furious, pacing some hotel suite, calling lawyers who couldn't erase her shadow from the bridge. I thought of David, whose coffin I had stroked while she whispered poison in my ear. And I thought of Mason, climbing out of the hole he'd dug with trembling hands, but hands that still worked. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe, maybe I was winning. But victories have a way of stirring ghosts. At dawn, Sloane called. Her voice was clipped. "The lab just came back with enhancements from the bridge footage. Emily, it's worse than we thought." My throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "They didn't just catch Tessa tossing a phone. They caught her prying something from David's car hood. The timestamp proves it. 18 minutes before the crash, she sabotaged the engine." I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "So it wasn't an accident?" "No," Sloane said. "It was murder." The word slammed into me like a cold wave. For weeks, I'd fought her as a liar, a manipulator, a parasite. Now I knew, she was a killer. And that changed everything. By mid-morning, detectives were at my door. Daniel Pike and Joel Beck had both given sworn statements about her past. The case was circling her like hawks. But the most devastating twist came at noon, when Mason called me from Clearwater. His voice was frantic, urgent. "Mom, you have to be careful. Tessa showed up here. She tried to see me. She said if I testify, she'll make sure I disappear like the others. Are you safe?" I asked, my pulse hammering. "She left before staff could stop her." "But, Mom, she knows I'm talking. She knows about Dylan." I closed my eyes, fighting the surge of fear. The trapdoor I'd sprung at the gala had worked, but now the Black Widow was thrashing in the net. And venomous things fight hardest when cornered. The phone calls started before sunrise. Blocked numbers. Voicemails with nothing but breathing. A text message at 3:14 a.m. He wasn't the first. He won't be the last. Sleep tight, Emily. I showed it to Sloane over coffee. Her jaw set like granite. She's unraveling, she said. Cornered predators bare their teeth. That's when they're easiest to catch, but also when they're most dangerous. By noon, the press had sniffed the blood. Reporters crowded the courthouse steps with microphones. The footage of Tessa at the bridge had gone viral, hashtags blooming like weeds, hashtag Hart Widow, hashtag Black Widow, hashtag Justice for David. News vans lined the street. Strangers stopped me on sidewalks to whisper, "Stay strong," as though I were a public monument instead of a woman trying to protect her grandson. The police held a press conference confirming they had reopened the investigation into the circumstances surrounding Mr. Hart's death. When asked directly if Tessa Chen was a suspect, the detective replied, "No comment." But his eyes gave it away. That night, Meredith, my oldest friend, sat at my kitchen table. She clasped my hands. "You've been fighting with steel, Em. But steel bends. What you need now is stone. Something she can't chip away at." "I don't know if I have stone left," I admitted. "You do," Meredith said. "I've known you since we were 12. You were always the one who kept the rest of us from falling apart. You don't crumble, you build." Her faith was heavier than gold. I tucked it into my heart like a weapon. 2 days later, Mason walked out of Clearwater in a clean shirt, 20 pounds lighter in shame but brighter in his eyes. He hugged me hard. "Mom," he said, "I'm ready to testify. Not just about Dylan. About Dad. About everything I saw." I held him like I hadn't since he was a boy. "Then we'll do it together." But Tessa wasn't done. That evening, she held her own press conference at a downtown hotel. Cameras caught her in a pale dress, hair loose, eyes artfully swollen with fake tears. "I loved David," she said, voice trembling. "He was my best friend, my protector. Emily has twisted everything. She's stolen my son from me. She's spreading lies to cover her own cruelty." Then she played her trump card. She handed the microphone to a man in a cheap suit, an actor, by the looks of him, who claimed to be a former partner of mine. He spun a tale of abuse and financial exploitation, accusing me of everything she herself had done. The cameras ate it up. By midnight, headlines blared, "Widow's Secret Life?" I should have been crushed. But instead, I smiled. Because she had overplayed her hand. The next morning, Sloane stormed into my house with a USB drive. She hired him from a talent agency in Chicago. I have the receipts. Same alias she used in Michigan. She couldn't resist being clever. We brought it straight to the detectives. By the afternoon, the actor had confessed. He'd been paid $20,000 to smear me on live television. The Black Widow had spun one lie too many, and now the threads were tangling around her. That night, Dylan crawled into my lap with his dinosaur and whispered, "Nana, is Mommy in trouble?" I stroked his hair. "Yes, sweetheart. But you're safe. That's what matters." He nodded, serious as a judge. "Then you win." And in that simple declaration, I felt the stone Meredith had promised settle in my chest. But even as I rocked him to sleep, I knew the truth. This war wasn't over until Tessa was in handcuffs. And the detectives had just promised me, it's only a matter of days. The detectives worked quickly now, emboldened by the smear campaign stunt backfiring on Tessa. Every lie she spun became another thread in the net they wove around her. Sloane updated me daily. They've subpoenaed her financials under all three names: Chen, Lowell, Arnett. Every alias has a trail. Joel Beck and Daniel Pike's testimonies are locked in. And the bridge footage? The enhanced stills are damning. We're nearly there. Nearly, I echoed. The word tasted like anticipation and dread. Meanwhile, Tessa thrashed. She filed an emergency motion demanding custody of Dylan. She accused me of alienation, of poisoning him against her. But when the judge asked why she had missed 3 scheduled visitations, she faltered. "Business commitments," she muttered, eyes darting. "Your Honor," I said calmly, "while she was busy, Dylan was with me, eating, reading, going to school. I have journals and nanny cam footage to prove it." The judge raised an eyebrow. "We'll review the evidence. For now, Dylan remains with Mrs. Hart." It was the smallest gavel tap, but it rang like thunder. That night, the house phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emily." Tessa's voice was low, unsteady, like a wire pulled too tight. I didn't respond. "You think you've won," she whispered. "But you don't know me. I can disappear. I've done it before." My grip tightened on the receiver. "Disappear then. Leave Dylan with me and vanish into whatever hole you crawled from." Silence. Then a ragged laugh. "He's mine. David gave him to me. You'll never take that away." And she hung up. I stood in the kitchen, the dial tone buzzing, realizing the truth. She wasn't planning to fight in court anymore. She was planning to run. The next day, Sloane confirmed it. She booked a one-way ticket under the name Florence Arnett. Flight to Belize. Leaves Friday. "What about Dylan?" I asked, my heart pounding. Sloane's mouth went grim. She listed him as her dependent on the reservation. For a moment, the room spun. She was trying to steal him. "Then we stop her," I said, steel rising through my veins. Friday came like a storm. I dressed in black slacks and a simple blouse, clothes for war, not show. I packed Dylan's backpack with snacks and his dinosaur toy. "We're going on a little adventure," I told him, heart aching. He grinned, oblivious. At the airport, detectives shadowed me through security. The plan was simple: let her appear, let her attempt the handoff, catch her in the act. And there she was, Tessa, in sunglasses and a wide hat, dragging a wheeled suitcase. She scanned the terminal like a predator searching for prey. When her eyes landed on Dylan holding my hand, her lips curled into a smile. She strode toward us. "Give him to me," she hissed, low enough that only I heard. "No," I said. She yanked off her sunglasses, eyes blazing. "I'm his mother." "You're a murderer," I replied, loud enough for heads to turn. That was the moment the detectives closed in. 2 on each side, badges flashing. "Tessa Chen, you're under arrest for the murder of David Hart and for attempted parental kidnapping." The terminal erupted. Travelers gasped. Cameras rose. Tessa's scream pierced the air as they cuffed her wrists. She twisted, snarling at me, "You think this is over? He'll know who I am. He'll come looking for me." I bent, shielding Dylan's ears. "No," I whispered so only she could hear. "He'll know me. And he'll forget you." They dragged her away. That night, the house was finally quiet. Dylan slept with his dinosaur tucked under his chin. Mason sat across from me, sober eyes steady, his hand covering mine. "You did it, Mom," he said. "No," I whispered, tears sliding at last. "We did." Outside, the oak swayed in the night wind. For the first time in months, its shadow didn't look like a crown or a trapdoor. It looked simply like a tree. And I allowed myself to believe, maybe, just maybe, we were free. The courthouse smelled of dust and polished wood, the kind of scent that carries old battles in its grain. I wore navy again, my armor color, and carried a folder so thick it might have been a weapon. Inside were affidavits from Joel Beck and Daniel Pike, financial records Tanya had unearthed, the enhanced bridge footage, and the transcripts of Tessa's paid smear attempt. Mason sat beside me, hands folded, sober and steady. Dylan was with Meredith in the lobby, coloring dinosaurs, blissfully unaware that his future was being weighed on the scales of justice. The judge entered, gavel cracking. "We are here to determine guardianship of minor child Dylan Chen, and to hear arguments regarding the competency of his biological mother, Miss Tessa Chen." Tessa was led in, wrists shackled, her once silken hair tangled, her face pale without her armor of cosmetics. Yet even in chains she smiled at the gallery, playing the martyr. "Your Honor," she began, "I am a mother who has suffered unimaginable grief. My husband and I." The prosecutor cut her off, voice sharp. "Objection. She refers to Mr. Hart as her husband. He was married to the petitioner, Mrs. Emily Hart, until his death." The judge nodded. "Sustained. Proceed with evidence." And so the avalanche began. Video of her at the bridge. Financial transfers into shell accounts. The testimony of 2 men who had survived her venom. The actor's confession, played on tape. Each piece landed like a hammer. Tessa's smile faltered, cracked, vanished. By the time the prosecutor finished, she was no longer the starlet in sequins, she was simply a woman cornered by her own shadow. Finally, it was my turn. I stood, hands steady on the podium. "Your Honor," I said, "I did not ask for this war. I believed I had a faithful husband, a safe home, a family that would endure. But when my son's wife told me at my husband's funeral that she had been his mistress, when she threatened me in my own house, when she neglected my grandson and tried to steal him from me, I had a choice. I could break, or I could protect. I chose to protect. And I will keep choosing it, as long as I have breath." The room was silent but for the scratching of pens. The judge leaned forward. "The court finds Ms. Chen unfit for guardianship. Custody of Dylan Hart is hereby granted to his grandmother, Mrs. Emily Hart. Furthermore, given the evidence presented, this court refers the matter of Mr. Hart's death to the criminal court, where Ms. Chen will face trial for homicide." The gavel came down. It was over. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones thrust at my face. Mason stepped between us, shielding me. "No comment," he said firmly. For once, he was the strong one, and I let him be. Inside the lobby, Dylan ran into my arms, his little legs pumping, his dinosaur clutched tight. "Nana," he shouted. I scooped him up, burying my face in his hair. "You're mine," I whispered. "Forever." That night, the house was quiet. No voicemails, no anonymous complaints, no footsteps in the hall that weren't ours. Mason sat at the table, working through a recovery workbook, determination etched on his face. Dylan slept peacefully upstairs. I poured a glass of wine, not out of grief but out of victory, and stepped onto the porch. The oak swayed in the breeze, and for the first time in months, I didn't see a crown, a trapdoor, or a gallows. I saw only branches, reaching upward, strong and whole. I thought of David, of the life I thought I knew. And I thought of Tessa, now caged, her web burned away. Then I thought of myself, Emily Hart, widow, mother, grandmother, survivor. And I smiled, whispering into the night. "You said I would lose everything. But I still have the one thing you'll never understand, family that's real." The stars glittered overhead like applause. And with Dylan's laugh echoing faintly from his dreams, I knew the war was truly won. The house no longer smelled of grief. It smelled of pancakes on Sunday mornings, of fresh paint in Mason's new studio upstairs, of crayons and peanut butter and the quiet hum of peace. Mason had been sober for 11 months. He came home from recovery thinner, steadier, a man reshaped by discipline instead of compulsion. He worked at the company under my guidance, slowly proving himself. I caught him sometimes, standing by the oak in the yard, whispering apologies to his father's ghost. Healing takes time, but he was walking the road. Dylan grew like wild grass, school pictures taped to the fridge, drawings of dinosaurs covering the hallway. At night, he asked for 3 stories, sometimes 4. He never mentioned his mother. He didn't need to. His eyes shone with trust when he looked at me, and that was enough. And me, Emily Hart. Widow. Survivor. Chair of a company that now bore not just my husband's name but mine. Some nights I still thought of Tessa, awaiting trial, her charm stripped bare under fluorescent lights. But those thoughts no longer poisoned me. They reminded me of the day I chose not to break. Family isn't about blood alone. It's about who fights for you, who stays, who builds. I had lost a husband. I had nearly lost a son. But I had gained something indestructible, a second chance at life with a grandson who called me Nana, like it was the most sacred word in the world. And under the branches of the oak, we laughed. Together. Free.